This girl is named Ban Ji-eum. She has lived through many lifetimes and, especially, she can remember the memories from all of her previous lives. As a result, Ji-eum has exploited this ability to earn money on the stage. Ji-eum performs a flamenco dance with remarkable skill and speaks numerous languages fluently. She can even read history from 1,000 years ago, effortlessly, which astonishes many people. Soon, she became famous and was named as the omnipotent young woman. However, unfortunately, all of her money was stolen by her father, who used it to gamble. Even the money she had secretly saved up was taken by her scoundrel of a brother. She could only sit on the ground helplessly. The money was intended to help her prepare herself neatly to meet someone, because after recovering the memories of all her past lives, the person she had promised to reunite with after her reincarnation. Because of having no money left, the next morning, Ji-eum had to run to find the only person who could help her at that moment, her niece, Kim A-kyung, from her 17th lifetime. At that moment, Ji-eum, with a disheveled appearance, came running over and handed A-kyung a piece of paper. It contained a message from her uncle, Kim Jung-ho, asking her to lend the child in front of her some money. However, A-kyung's uncle had passed away early, and a piece of paper like this couldn't prove anything. After trying many ways without success, Ji-eum decided to reveal her true identity to prove she was A-kyung's uncle. She pointed to the pictures on the wall and fluently recounted memories only the two of them knew. It turned out that Ji-eum, in her 17th life, was a vaudeville performer, and she had a niece, A-kyung. But unfortunately, she had fallen gravely ill and passed away early. Before leaving this world, she had told A-kyung that she would reincarnate and return to protect her. Hearing Ji-eum repeat that promise, A-kyung appeared emotional and seemed to believe what Ji-eum was saying. A-kyung then asked what her father's name was, but unfortunately, after so many lifetimes, many things had faded from memory. With no other options, she pleaded with A-kyung to lend her 100,000 won and to consider it as helping a pitiful child, because in this life, she absolutely had to meet someone again. When A-kyung asked who that person was, Ji-eum hesitated before uttering a name, Moon Seo-ha. It was during her 18th life when she was still Yoon Ju-won. Seo-ha, in her memory, was a mischievous boy who had knocked over her easel without even apologizing. The second time she met Seo-ha was when she visited her mother's close friend and saw him again by the pool. With curiosity, she asked him why he was down there, but was unexpectedly pulled into the water by Seo-ha. Though his prank left her soaking wet, Ji-eum smiled. It had been a long time since she had felt such curiosity about someone. The moments she spent with Seo-ha always made her feel alive with her right age and forget the pain she had endured through countless cycles of reincarnation. On the day Ju-won's mother lay on her bed, weak from illness, she promised to take good care of Seo-ha in her place. Unfortunately, that promise could not be fulfilled because on Seo-ha's birthday, the car that was carrying both him and Ju-won got into an accident. In order to shield Seo-ha with her own body, Ju-won took her last breath right there in the car and then reincarnated into her 19th life as the current Ji-eum. In her heart, she still held on to unfinished matters from her previous life. Ji-eum wanted to know whether Seo-ha had survived that day or if he was living well. Ji-eum's story moved A-kyung, and she agreed to lend Ji-eum the money, wishing her success in finding Seo-ha soon. Overjoyed, Ji-eum left, but before going, she turned back to look at A-kyung and said that living alone must have been hard for her, and asked A-kyung to try and wait for her. She then quickly ran outside. Meanwhile, Ji-eum skillfully hopped onto a bus. After that, she took a taxi to Seo-ha's house. Standing in front of the familiar gate from her past life, memories of Ju-won suddenly flooded back. On Seo-ha's birthday, she had given him a secret box and hid the key in the spot that she liked most. Little did she know that this beautiful memory would become her last in her 18th life. At the end of each lifetime, Ji-eum would always pray that it would be her final life, or that those memories would never return. But this time, she broke the pattern. She prayed and promised Seo-ha that she would return. Unfortunately, the accident had damaged Seo-ha's hearing, and he could no longer hear her words. The image of Ji-eum collapsing on top of him became a haunting memory that Seo-ha could never forget. Returning to the present, Ji-eum found a way to climb over the wall and enter Seo-ha's house, relying on memories from her past life to climb a tree from which she could look into Seo-ha's room. There, she saw the young man sitting by the window, playing the piano. Ji-eum finally burst into tears of joy. Seo-ha was indeed still alive, and not only that, he had grown into a tall and handsome man. However, his temper was still as fiery and irritable as ever. Though she had only intended to see if he was still alive, Ji-eum couldn't help but want to look at him a little longer. Afterward, Ji-eum returned to live with A-kyung. The two of them ate much strenuous in life and were incredibly happy. But one day, Seo-hae suddenly disappeared, and from then on, Ji-eum never saw him again. 8 years passed like that, and Ji-eum grew into a beautiful young woman with an extremely high IQ, able to breeze through important exams like the high school entrance exam effortlessly. When she heard the news that Seo-ha had become the director of MI Group's branch in Germany, Ji-eum was overjoyed. Finally, she had found a way to meet Seo-ha again. Ji-eum joined MI Group, even though she was being courted by many other companies, offering better benefits. However, the path to Seo-ha was still full of challenges, as he seemed to have no intention of returning to Korea. While Ji-eum was contemplating whether to become a senior employee at MI in order to transfer to Germany or not, a small piece of news about Seo-ha made her extremely happy. Seo-ha had unexpectedly returned to Korea to take over as the director of MI Hotel. His goal was to restore the hotel to its golden era, just as his mother had done. Seo-ha's plan to revive the hotel clashed with his father's wishes, which made his father extremely angry. Ji-eum sped to MI Hotel to submit her job application. After all these years, she had finally met Seo-ha again, but now their circumstances were different. To him, Ji-eum was just a stranger standing by the hotel's pool. Seo-ha recalled moments with his mother and the girl in the red dress. Suddenly, Ji-eum appeared behind him and asked, "What's down there?" Ji-eum repeated the question, just as she did when she was still Ju-won, whom Seo-ha once knew. But instead of pushing her into the pool like in their previous life, Seo-ha coldly told Ji-eum no unauthorized entry and then walked away. While moving house to the mansion, Seo-ha's secretary handed him a stack of job applications, and Ji-eum's outstanding qualifications caught his attention. As a result, his secretary arranged for a personal interview with Seo-ha. After knocking, she walked straight in and called out to Seo-ha, but he didn't respond. It was then that she realized the accident had caused him to lose hearing in one ear. After a lengthy back and forth during the interview, Seo-ha mentioned that the job might not meet her expectations. Unexpectedly, Ban Ji-eum made a proposal that shocked him. She suggested that if he wasn't sure, he should try dating her. Moon Seo-ha tried to stay calm, saying that he must have misheard, but Ji-eum repeated the offer once again. She told him that he didn't mishear, and then asked Seo-ha if he wanted to date her. Seo-ha, encountering this kind of situation for the first time, thought to himself that Ji-eum must be joking, or else she was just a crazy woman. Ji-eum left Seo-ha so confused that even while sitting in the car on his way home, he couldn't stop wondering about it and asked his secretary Ha Do-yoon about that situation. At that moment, Seo-ha received a call from someone named Yoon Cho-won, but he didn't answer. Cho-won was Ji-eum's younger sister in her 18th life. She lived in a place filled with flowers where, on romantic evenings, a handsome man would bring wine to enjoy together. But it seemed Cho-won had her mind on someone else, her attention fixed on her phone, as if waiting for a call from someone. While gathering decoration materials for the hotel, Ji-eum stopped by the Insadong district to have a look around. Unexpectedly, she saw Seo-ha there. At that moment, he was feeling overwhelmed by the loud noise of trumpets and drums. Seeing Seo-ha in a state of panic, Ji-eum suddenly ran over, grabbed his hand, and pulled him along quickly. Seo-ha, not understanding what was happening, let her drag him along until they both were exhausted and stopped. They sat down on a nearby bench to rest. Ji-eum explained that she had pulled him away like that to help him escape from his panic. She recounted a previous life during a time of war when the dead were falling like rain and she was the only one left alive. All she could do was run fast to escape the horrific scene. After regaining her composure, she found herself in a field where life had returned. However, Seo-ha clearly did not believe her words. He leaned closer and quietly asked if Ji-eum had a mental issue. The question left Ji-eum speechless, but instead of answering him, she proposed that they get married. Seo-ha was bewildered by this unique marriage proposal. Ji-eum said it was a hint for him to recognize where he had met her before, but Seo-ha couldn't imagine the proposal he made to Ji-eum in a past lifetime. As there was still no result from the interview, which made Ji-eum anxious, she decided to meet Seo-ha to express herself further. While the two were talking, the door suddenly opened, and hearing Secretary Ha Do-yoon call the girl who had just entered Cho-won, Ji-eum realized that it was her younger sister. This was officially the first meeting between the two sisters in this lifetime. In a moment, memories flooded back. It seemed that Seo-ha did not want to meet Cho-won, and Secretary Do-yoon tactfully invited Cho-won to leave. Seo-ha firmly told Ji-eum to go back and wait, but Ji-eum said she was willing to accept even a small position, like a housekeeping staff member, to work at MI Hotel. Ji-eum's persistence puzzled him. Do-yoon remembered that she still had a roll of documents that she had forgotten to give to Seo-ha. At that moment, she happened to meet Seo-ha in the hotel lobby and handed it to him. It turned out to be a drawing of the hotel at its busiest and most crowded time. Seo-ha showed a hint of surprise, and then immediately changed his mind. He agreed to let her stay at the hotel for a trial period. On the first morning of Ji-eum's work at the hotel, she and Seo-ha encountered a noisy group of young men in the hotel lobby. The staff reported that they were the general manager's son and his friends. Seeing Ji-eum behind Seo-ha, one of them grabbed her and asked her to join them for a while. Seo-ha, showing no mercy, kicked him in the leg and put him directly on the hotel's blacklist. At that moment, General Manager Jang Yeon-oki appeared and invited Seo-ha to her office for tea. Ji-eum immediately recognized her as the woman who had previously had an affair with Seo-ha's father. During the first internal meeting, everyone was assigned tasks except Ji-eum. When she questioned this, Seo-ha explained that her skills were too diverse, so she should assist others. Unable to utilize her talents, Ji-eum felt a bit disappointed. As she stepped outside, she unexpectedly ran into Cho-won. Not wanting Seo-ha to know, Cho-won had used a fake name to submit a project proposal to the hotel, and had asked Ji-eum to submit it on her behalf. Seeing Ji-eum rummaging through her document folder, Secretary Do-yoon immediately approached to give her a warning. Seo-ha, showing zeal in his heart, watched as the two people whispered secretly outside. After Ji-eum left, Seo-ha summoned Secretary Do-yoon to question him. Secretary Do-yoon vaguely replied that he and Ji-eum were just chatting. Seo-ha's heart had more and more doubts. Who was Ji-eum, after all? As he sank into deep thinking, a sudden memory flashed through his mind. The image of a little girl with a bright smile appeared. The girl had told Seo-ha to marry her. This memory awakened, and Seo-ha suddenly laughed. He took out an old scarf and immediately called Ji-eum. She rushed to meet him at full speed, but unfortunately, she was disappointed. Seo-ha only remembered that she was the 9-year-old Ji-eum who used to follow him around and once pulled him away from trouble. Still not giving up, Ji-eum once again proposed marriage. This was not a simple decision, but one that had been considered over many years. Although Seo-ha refused when he was alone, he was laughing while taking a shower. On this side, Seo-ha's father called Secretary Do-yoon over to be tasked with monitoring and supervising Seo-ha. He even mentioned that within 2 years, Seo-ha would be moved to another place. After that, he handed Secretary Do-yoon a stack of money, but Do-yoon refused. On the other hand, Seo-ha tried to call Secretary Do-yoon, but couldn't reach him. Since he couldn't drive himself, he had no choice but to ask Ji-eum for help. As a result, Ji-eum drove to pick Seo-ha up, and they stopped in front of a forest. Ji-eum didn't expect that Seo-ha had brought flowers to visit a grave, and she was even more shocked to find that the grave belonged to her from her previous life. Seo-ha knelt down and, for the first time in front of Ji-eum, allowed himself to cry as a child. Standing before her own grave, Ji-eum was overwhelmed with confusion. From before until now, she had only felt her own pain. But today, in this life, this was the first time that she understood the sorrow of those left behind. Knowing that Seo-ha was grieving, Ji-eum led him to a nearby cherry blossom garden. Seo-ha suddenly asked Ji-eum what she liked. Without hesitation, she replied that she liked him. When Ji-eum asked Seo-ha in return what his type was, Seo-ha thought for a moment, and then answered that he liked older women. It could be seen that he still couldn't forget Yoon-ju-won. However, Ji-eum continued, saying that people often told her she seemed mature beyond her years. This left Seo-ha speechless. He thought to himself that it was a sign of intransigence. As soon as Ji-eum drove onto the road, a truck sped past, triggering Seo-ha's traumatic memories of the past accident. Ji-eum quickly handed him an airbag to help him breathe and calm down, which eventually settled him. After today, Ji-eum finally understood the pain and loss of those left behind. Ji-eum sits drinking on the anniversary of her own death, and thanks to An, remembered that today was also Seo-ha's birthday. So she rushed through the rain to his house. Seo-ha sat alone, playing the piano in the quiet room. Ever since Ji-eum had departed from this world, he had never celebrated his birthday because he was afraid it would remind him of the moment she took her last breath. At that moment, Ji-eum took a taxi to Seo-ha's house, not knowing that someone else had arrived before her. As soon as Seo-ha opened the door, Ji-eum seized the opportunity to interrupt him. She had heard that confessing one's feelings on their birthday would be unforgettable, so she told Seo-ha that she liked him. However, at that crucial moment, Cho-won suddenly opened the door, and the two of them locked eyes in stunned silence, as if a dramatic confrontation between the two women was about to unfold. Seo-ha callously used the excuse of having a guest to send Ji-eum away, then turned and went back inside. The atmosphere inside the house was equally tense. Even though he had vowed never to celebrate his birthday again, Cho-won stubbornly insisted that he blow out the candles. Seo-ha angrily ordered her to leave his house within 3 minutes. Overwhelmed by the hurt, Cho-won argued with him before leaving immediately. When Cho-won reached the gate, she was surprised to see Ji-eum still standing there. She handed Ji-eum the cake she had made over the past 4 hours. Ji-eum couldn't help but ask if Cho-won liked Seo-ha. Cho-won didn't answer directly, but instead asked Ji-eum if she would give up on Seo-ha if Cho-won liked him. Ji-eum fell into silence. The fact that her younger sister also liked Seo-ha made Ji-eum extremely uncomfortable. She liked Seo-ha, but didn't want to compete with Cho-won. The next morning, when Ji-eum met Seo-ha again, Seo-ha recalled her confession from the previous day. Ji-eum realized she had been somewhat aggressive and took the initiative to apologize to him to clear the awkward atmosphere. Seo-ha suddenly thanked her and then awkwardly walked away. The hotel renovation project faced some difficulties as the company was unwilling to invest. Seo-ha had no choice but to seek help from outside. He went to meet his uncle, whose introduction significantly improved the chances of securing funding. After the discussion, Seo-ha couldn't drive himself home, so his secretary Do-yoon came to pick him up. Unexpectedly, as soon as they arrived, Secretary Do-yoon was met by Juk, who was his old classmate. Juk relied on his power to mock and stomp on Do-yoon's phone in front of his friends. After witnessing this incident, feeling indignant on behalf of Secretary Do-yoon, Seo-ha poured a bottle of wine over Juk's head and almost went so far as to punch him, but fortunately Secretary Do-yoon intervened in time. The two men then discussed their work and left arm in arm. The next morning, Seo-ha brought a bouquet of flowers, intending to place it in the flower pot in the hotel lobby. However, a stranger had arrived before him and had already placed an identical bouquet there. When Seo-ha saw this, he asked Ji-eum if she was the one who had replaced the flowers. Upon learning that these were the flowers Seo-ha's former love had particularly liked, Ji-eum was shocked. Was it true that he had loved someone else before? At that moment, Cho-won suddenly entered, carrying a large bouquet of flowers. Secretary Do-yoon stopped her and asked why she was there. It turned out that Cho-won had used a fake name to submit a proposal for the hotel's landscape renovation project in order to help both of them. Seo-ha then called Secretary Do-yoon into an office to question why Cho-won was chosen, given that he was currently unable to meet her. Through the argument inside, Ji-eum had to quietly close the door, not wanting the harsh words to hurt Cho-won. Cho-won hurriedly turned and walked outside, but after going a short distance, she sat down on the ground and cried. Ji-eum quickly followed her. She felt deeply for her sister, but didn't know how to comfort her. She invited Cho-won out for drinks that evening. After a few drinks, Cho-won confessed that she had fallen in love at first sight, which made Ji-eum curious. She remembered the first time Seo-ha and Cho-won met. Was it really that intense? Cho-won even told her that he had a younger brother who was meticulous, kept accounts, and was very good at driving. The description of the person Cho-won spoke of was increasingly different from Ji-eum's image of Seo-ha, leading her to confirm and ask if Cho-won liked Secretary Do-yoon instead. Cho-won confirmed that this was true. Hearing this, Ji-eum suddenly laughed. It turned out that Cho-won's initial affection was not for Seo-ha, but for Secretary Do-yoon, who was always by his side. At this point, Ji-eum could finally relax, relieved after days of trying to face that awkward situation. Cho-won then revealed to Ji-eum about her biggest rival, who was also her late older sister. Eventually, Cho-won, who was extremely drunk, was taken home by Ji-eum. She placed Cho-won in front of her biological mother's house from her past life and then quickly hid nearby. When her mother came out, she didn't hesitate to slap Cho-won and muttered, "Why don't you drink with a man if you're going to drink?" She then asked Cho-won when she planned to get married. Ji-eum, hiding from a distance, couldn't help but laugh, marveling at how her mother was still the same as ever. However, these words were overheard by her mother, who grabbed Ji-eum's arm and, with tears in her eyes, asked if she was Ju-won. Mrs. Yoon remembered Ji-eum's words that one day she would be reincarnated and returned to her, so she had always believed and waited for her return. The two embraced emotionally. It seemed like a moment of maternal happiness, but the bitter reality shattered that illusion. It turned out to be just Ji-eum's imagination. Seo-ha, who had intended to visit Cho-won, saw Ji-eum acting strangely in front of the house, crying and laughing as if she were mad. He approached her and turned her around, only to see a trail of tears on her face. Ji-eum was shocked and unconsciously called out Seo-ha's name, which made him associate her with the Ju-won from his memories. Ji-eum snapped out of her daze, realizing it was a slip of the tongue that she had inadvertently made. Seo-ha, bewildered, quickly explained that she was Ji-eum, and didn't forget to confess her feelings to him once again. Just then, the door suddenly swung open. Mrs. Yoon, hearing the commotion outside, came out to check. Not wanting to be seen, Seo-ha grabbed Ji-eum's hand and they ran away quickly. When they stopped, Ji-eum suddenly remarked that Seo-ha's hand was very soft. Embarrassed, Seo-ha pulled his hand away. To explain her odd behavior earlier, Ji-eum lied to Seo-ha, saying that seeing Cho-won and her mother made her remember her own mother, who had left. She then leaned in and asked him if he wanted to go for a second round, which turned out to mean going for some noodles. The two of them casually sat in front of a convenience store, looking as intimate as a couple. After they finished eating, Ji-eum helped him get a taxi home. During the ride, Seo-ha was extremely confused, seeing Ji-eum's presence everywhere. He had to remind himself to stay alert and not be brainwashed. Instead of going home, Seo-ha went to Secretary Do-yoon's house, where he encountered Do-yoon's younger brother in front of the house. It turned out he was the manager of MI Hotel, but there are times when he's so shameless like that. After eating at someone else's house, he even asked to stay the night. That night, as they were going to bed, Seo-ha told Secretary Do-yoon that he had decided to meet Cho-won to discuss a potential collaboration. To be fair, if not for the unresolved issues in his heart, Cho-won was a capable person. Seo-ha was teased by Secretary Do-yoon when Ji-eum was mentioned. He felt embarrassed and turned his back to signal that he wanted to sleep, but his thoughts unconsciously drifted to her. Meanwhile, Ji-eum was walking home, and on a deserted road, she crossed paths with a man dressed in a black suit. At the moment they passed each other, the man suddenly stopped, staring at Ji-eum with an intense and suspicious gaze. When Ji-eum got home, she confided in Ae-kyung that she had met her mother from a past life today. Ae-kyung noticed that Ji-eum wasn't in a good mood, so the two of them brought out some alcohol to drink. Gi-eum could be called a god of alcohol because, technically, this was her third round of drinking today. She confessed to her niece that she wanted to be with Seo-ha as Ji-eum, not Ju-won. Meanwhile, the man in the black suit appeared once again, holding a dusty wooden box in his hand, which contained a stick used for rolling dice, resembling the staff used by ancient shamans. The secret of Ji-eum's reincarnation may soon be revealed. The next morning, Seo-ha and Secretary Do-yoon went to meet Chan-hyuk to discuss the collaboration. Ji-eum unexpectedly appeared. Looking at Ji-eum, Chan-hyuk suddenly recalled when she took her home the day before. That memory made Chan-hyuk feel as if Ji-eum was like her sister. She kept asking Ji-eum if they had met before, nearly causing Ji-eum to accidentally reveal the truth. Flustered, Ji-eum dropped the teapot on the ground. Seo-ha hurried over to help her clean up. Ji-eum and Chan-hyuk chimed in, praising Seo-ha for being a gentleman. While Seo-ha and Ji-eum were walking through the garden, Ji-eum boldly declared that from now on, she would confess her love to him 3 times. If, by the 3rd time, he still rejected her, she would give up. She didn't believe he would still turn her down by the 3rd time. Meanwhile, things were no less awkward with Cho-won, who straightforwardly suggested that Secretary Do-yoon go on a blind date with her. Seeing Cho-won's bright expression, it seemed like Secretary Do-yoon might have softened, but unfortunately, he still refused. The next morning, when Ji-eum went to work, she received a phone call from her brother. As soon as she picked up, he demanded money from her. Not wanting to hear anymore, she hung up. Seo-ha also had a rough morning. As soon as he arrived at the hotel, he ran into the arrogant face of the director's son. Without saying much, Seo-ha directly ordered security to throw him out of the hotel, then went to meet with the director. When she heard that her son had been kicked out, the director could no longer maintain her calm demeanor and started making veiled threats to Seo-ha, implying that she knew more than he did. After leaving her office, Seo-ha ordered Secretary Do-yoon to go to the accounting department to retrieve some documents. He decided to review all the records once again to find out what exactly the director had been doing over the past 3 years. Taking advantage of the fact that no one in the accounting department was paying attention, Secretary Do-yoon gathered all the documents. Realizing it was already quite late, Seo-ha invited Secretary Do-yoon to have dinner with him. But Do-yoon declined and didn't hide the fact that he had to meet the chairman, who was also Seo-ha's father. Left with no choice, Seo-ha took a cab to go home by himself. On the way, he was shocked to see Ji-eum running frantically, being chased by a man. It turned out her brother had come to her living place to demand money. He roughly grabbed Ji-eum's hair in an attempt to stop him. Seo-ha was punched and bloodied. Seeing this, Ji-eum, heartbroken, turned around and hit her brother, then drove him away. Seo-ha asked for an explanation, and Ji-eum honestly admitted that she now looked like someone from the bottom of society, clinging to him to rise up. Seo-ha directly refuted this, stating that if she were a money-hungry person clinging to him, she would look more pitiful, not so aggressive like that. Noticing Ji-eum's distress, he invited her out for drinks, expressing a desire to hear her talk. They drank cup after cup until Seo-ha was drunk. His eyes filled with Ji-eum's beautiful image. Being with Ji-eum always reminded him of Ju-won. He cupped her face with both hands and pulled her closer. Ji-eum warned him not to do that, or she might kiss him. Seo-ha, in a drunken and challenging tone, dared her to kiss him. However, to prevent Seo-ha from regretting it the next day, Ji-eum restrained herself, hoping he would say that when sober. Meanwhile, Secretary Do-yoon was reporting Seo-ha's situation to the CEO, choosing to speak vaguely and not mentioning the bookkeeping issues Seo-ha was dealing with. The chairman seemed to be paying attention to Ji-eum due to her complex family situation. The chairman asked him to keep Ji-eum away from Seo-ha and the company. On this side, Ji-eum was struggling to carry the unconscious Seo-ha home. Unable to catch a taxi, she suddenly had an idea to borrow a cart to pull him. This moment felt like a return to a previous life when she was a vibrant young man. Perhaps because she was so vigorous, she didn't notice Seo-ha gradually falling behind. With no other option, Ji-eum had to ask Do-yoon to drive and pick him up. She placed him in the co-pilot seat, knowing Seo-ha was still traumatized and couldn't sit in the back seat. This left Ju-won confused, thinking she and Seo-ha were close. But she was unaware of this. The two of them took Seo-ha home. In his half-conscious state, Seo-ha continued to remember the accident, holding on to Ji-eum's hand tightly and repeatedly begging her not to leave. Seeing Seo-ha's pitiful condition, she suddenly realized how much he had been stuck in that painful moment all these years. Witnessing Seo-ha's state until this moment, Cho-won truly felt his pain. She stepped outside, sitting and crying uncontrollably. Cho-won couldn't imagine how Seo-ha had suffered all these years, having experienced the same pain of losing someone important. Yet, she had blamed him for her sister's death, believing it was because of him that her sister had died, turning it into a splinter in Seo-ha's heart. Meanwhile, inside the room, Ji-eum couldn't hold back her tears upon discovering that Seo-ha still kept the box she had given him years ago. That night, when she went to bed, Ji-eum had a nightmare. In her dream, the dice stick appeared again, and a knife was plunged into someone, causing Ji-eum to wake up startled. It had been a long time since she had such a dream, and every time it happened, Ji-eum would feel sick and short of breath. Before dawn, Seo-ha was awakened by the sound of the doorbell. He smiled when he saw that Ji-eum was the one outside. Hearing footsteps approaching, Seo-ha turned around, but before him stood Ju-won with her face covered in blood. The images of her and Ji-eum kept intertwining in his mind, causing a sharp headache. Seo-ha woke up, realizing it was just a nightmare. At that moment, Secretary Do-yoon arrived to take him to work as usual. As he entered the living room, he was startled to find all the furniture in disarray. Secretary Do-yoon went to look for Seo-ha in the room, and, seeing Seo-ha's unstable condition, called to question Cho-won, telling her why she let Seo-ha get so drunk and lose his mind like that. But the person who went drinking with Seo-ha was not Cho-won, but Ji-eum. The doorbell rang at Seo-ha's house once again, and this time, it was really Ji-eum. But perhaps due to the nightmare from the previous night, Seo-ha didn't want to see her at that moment. While Ji-eum was waiting for the traffic light to cross the street, a mysterious girl suddenly approached her. Seeing a boy distracted by his phone and not paying attention to the traffic, both girls quickly raised their hands to stop him. Ji-eum pinched the boy's cheek and warned him to be careful when crossing the street. Suddenly, the mysterious girl turned and smiled and called her Ju-won. Being called by a name from a past life by a stranger left Ji-eum feeling somewhat bewildered. Meanwhile, Seo-ha was submerged in the pool, seriously contemplating. The moment spent with Ji-eum truly made him forget all his worries and made his heart feel light. While Seo-ha was still underwater, Cho-won, worried about him, rushed over. Seeing Seo-ha floating motionless in the pool, she panicked and jumped in. After making sure he was okay, she burst into tears, thinking he had drowned. Secretary Do-yoon had to take care of two people. He brought Seo-ha a glass of warm water, only to be taken aback by Ji-eum's comment. Ji-eum said he seemed to like her. Secretary Do-yoon told him that if he liked her, then just like her, there was no need to make such a fuss. Seo-ha replied heavily that every time he saw Ji-eum, he thought of Ju-won, which drove him crazy. At this point, Secretary Do-yoon was at a loss for words. To resolve the issues with Seo-ha, Cho-won asked Secretary Do-yoon to arrange a meeting with him. They arranged to meet at the beach, where Secretary Do-yoon would take Seo-ha for a walk. Cho-won thought it over and decided to invite Ji-eum to come along. On the blue beach, Seo-ha and Ji-eum stood and talked. Seo-ha had many questions for her, such as why she had cried that day and why she had called him so casually without using honorifics, even though he was much older than her. Instead of answering him, Ji-eum chose to remain silent. Amidst the sunny and windy beach, Ji-eum confessed her feelings to him once more. This time, Seo-ha did not refuse, but he did not respond immediately. Dae-eum then pulled him into a dance. The two laughed joyfully, immersing themselves in the dance and ignoring everything around them. Suddenly, a shower of rain appeared, and the four of them had to take shelter temporarily at Seo-ha's nearby villa. There, Cho-won and Seo-ha gradually resolved their issues. Meanwhile, Ji-eum was still at her old family villa from a past life when the mysterious young man from before suddenly appeared at A-kyung's restaurant. He came to ask for extra work at the shop, but unexpectedly arrived just when A-kyung fainted. She was taken to the hospital and remained unconscious for 5 hours before waking up. Despite multiple examinations, no illness was detected. She told the boy not to reveal this to anyone, including Ji-eum. At that moment, Ji-eum was suddenly awakened by a thunderclap. She wandered around the old house and reminisced about the memories from when she was still Ju-won. She found the old doll she had hidden in a secret place. However, this action was seen by Cho-won. Seeing that Ji-eum had discovered both her own and her sister's secret hiding places, Cho-won couldn't help shouting and asked Ji-eum how she knew that place. Ji-eum, still lost in her memories, was just startled. To cover up, she said she was looking for a hair tie and apologized for carelessly touching things in the house. Seo-ha had witnessed all these actions, which once again disturbed his feelings. Defying the rain, Seo-ha went out for a walk alone. Ji-eum hurriedly grabbed an umbrella and chased after him. Under the rain, Seo-ha saw the image of Ju-won on Ji-eum and realized the shadow Ju-won had left was too large. Eventually, Seo-ha rejected Ji-eum's confession at the beach. Ji-eum returned home, knowing that A-kyung had been suffering from joint pain recently, so she had bought a special gift for her. However, she was surprised to find that after just 1 day away, A-kyung had already hired a new employee and allowed him to eat and sleep there. Ji-eum worried and scrutinized the new employee with probing eyes. Meanwhile, Seo-ha was waiting in the CEO office. He had discovered evidence that Miss Jang was using company funds for personal matters. He threatened her that either she cooperated in renovating the hotel or be dismissed in disgrace like her son. Unable to withstand Seo-ha's pressure, Miss Jang chased after him with documents, intending to hit him. Ji-eum quickly stepped in front of Seo-ha to protect him. At that moment, Seo-ha's uncle appeared, hurriedly stopping Miss Jang and then pulling her away. The next day, loan sharks came to the home of Ji-eum's older brother. unable to extract money from his sister, he had revealed that his sister had a very wealthy boyfriend who might pay off the debt. Because of this, the gangsters came looking for Seo-ha. Ji-eum's brother used her to lure Seo-ha to a secluded place. This was witnessed by Do-jin, the younger brother of Secretary Do-yoon. Meanwhile, Ji-eum suddenly received a strange message stating that if she didn't want her boyfriend to be beaten, she should come immediately. On the other side, Seo-ha, upon discovering that the loan sharks were using him to threaten Ji-eum, decided to ignore them and leave. However, they rudely attempted to use force to stop him. As the leader was about to be the next target to be beaten, Do-jin ran over and hit him with a stick. Secretary Do-yoon's younger brother had followed Seo-ha and the loan sharks here. The sound of police sirens made them hastily flee. He looked towards the police car and was very surprised that there was no police car there. It turned out that Ji-eum, when in an emergency, had used a speaker to mimic the sound of a police siren. She bowed her head and apologized for the trouble she had caused him. As Seo-ha and Ji-eum were debating about resolving the issue for her, Do-jin's keen eyes saw through it. He interrupted and called Ji-eum's sister-in-law. Despite Seo-ha's strong denial, the two continued to call each other sister-in-law and younger brother, and the sibling-like affection surged. They even decided to go for a barbecue together. Meanwhile, Cho-won sat alone, dazed, increasingly suspicious of Ji-eum's strange behavior. She happened to meet Secretary Do-yoon, and their conversation turned to Ji-eum. From Secretary Do-yoon, Cho-won learned that Ji-eum had admitted that her approach to Seo-ha and Cho-won was intentional. On the other side, Ji-eum, enjoying the barbecue with Seo-ha and Do-jin, received a call from Cho-won. She went to find Cho-won and saw her drinking alone. Ji-eum asked her what had happened, but Cho-won, influenced by Secretary Do-yoon's words earlier, was very disappointed in Ji-eum. She considered that Ji-eum had deliberately approached Seo-ha by pretending to be Ju-won, using her own pain to win his affection. Cho-won called Ji-eum over to warn her that if she did this to her and Seo-ha again, she would not let Ji-eum off the hook. Cho-won could not help but question Ji-eum, asking why Ji-eum made her feel so much like her sister, why she knew all the secrets of her sister and herself, and why she patted her head affectionately. Cho-won even irrationally thought that if Ji-eum were her sister, everything would make sense. This drove her crazy, and she wished that Ji-eum was truly her sister. Seeing Cho-won burst into tears, Ji-eum could not help but waver. She closed her eyes, repeatedly reminding herself that this would make her regret it, but her emotions betrayed her. She took Cho-won's shoulders and spoke gently like an older sister. Even though she knew she shouldn't, she admitted that she was Ju-won. Contrary to what Ji-eum had hoped for, Cho-won thought Ji-eum was lying again. She turned to leave, but was held back by Ji-eum. Ji-eum patiently explained to her younger sister that she had returned to the old house many times because she missed her sister and their parents. Based on her memory, she even mentioned that Cho-won had 3 moles on the back of her neck and a large scar on her back from a deep cut by a mirror when she was little, details that even Cho-won herself was unaware of. Cho-won only felt that the idea of reincarnation and remembering a past life was too absurd. Ji-eum went home and told Ae-kyung about her conversation with Cho-won. Suddenly, Ji-eum heard the sound of a vibrating phone, and the two of them discovered Min-gi, who they were unsure had heard the conversation. It turned out he was there to meet the mysterious girl named Hana. It seemed that the two of them knew each other. They were secretly monitoring Ji-eum and Seo-ha and even discussed Ae-kyung's recent illness. Meanwhile, Cho-won returned to her mother's house and asked her about things that happened when she was young to verify Ji-eum's claims. Her mother was astonished because everything Cho-won mentioned was true. To further reinforce her trust, when she happened to meet Seo-ha, she asked if he believed in past lives. This question left Seo-ha stunned, as Ju-won had asked him a similar question before. Hearing this, Cho-won immediately asked if she had said anything more. Realizing that her reaction might have been a bit excessive, Cho-won then asked if Ji-eum was in the office. Seo-ha informed her that Ji-eum had taken the day off. It turned out that Ji-eum had taken the day off because she was preparing to meet with the director of the loan shark company to resolve her brother's debt. She believed that to defeat the enemy, one must target the general, so she went directly to the office to meet with the company's director. Ji-eum brought a blue ceramic vase from the Goryeo dynasty to use as collateral for the debt. Upon learning that Ji-eum's boyfriend was from a wealthy family, the blue vase suddenly seemed more valuable. the director became much more accommodating. He accepted the vase, and Ji-eum presented a debt repayment contract, demanding that he sign it while also threatening him with the fact that his company was operating without proper registration. The director was forced to stamp the contract. Just when it seemed the matter was settled, Ji-eum's older brother suddenly appeared. He was puzzled about why she was there. After Ji-eum left, he eavesdropped on the situation inside the director's office and heard some shocking news. It turned out that the accident involving Seo-ha and Ju-won was caused by this director, but a deliberate one. The director himself admitted that he was very scared when he learned that an innocent child had died. Returning to Cho-won that same evening, she unexpectedly received a call from her mother. Previously, Cho-won had been curious about what her older sister was like, and her mother suddenly recalled a story from a long time ago in the garden when Ju-won had behaved very strangely. She recounted that Ju-won had repeatedly said she would be reincarnated and would come back to find her, asking her not to be too sad if she died. Hearing this, Cho-won remembered Ji-eum's unusual behavior, and her last words when Ji-eum said her past life was Ju-won. Cho-won quickly hung up the phone and immediately drove off, deciding to meet in a small alley near Ji-eum's house. Cho-won decided to try to believe Ji-eum's myth story, so if she later finds out that Ji-eum was lying, she will never forgive her. Ji-eum broke through the final barrier in her heart. Cho-won rushed to embrace Ji-eum, accepting that Ji-eum was indeed her sister. Ji-eum, stunned, hugged her sister. Perhaps this was one of the most strange and joyful moments in her 19th life. Min-gi, observing from a distance, saw this touching scene and immediately called Hannah, saying that Ji-eum had rekindled a past connection. However, Ji-eum was unaware of this. Her actions made things more complicated. The next morning, A-kyung dressed up beautifully and told Ji-eum that she was going out to dinner with Min-gi, specifically asking her not to disturb them during their date. However, A-kyung's condition seemed to worsen back at home. Perhaps her intuition made Ji-eum suspicious of Min-gi. She opened Min-gi's room to check and found the strange dice-like stick and heard the tinkling sound of the bell. Memories from her dreams resurfaced, making her stunned. She let go of the cane and hurriedly closed the door before stepping outside. Coincidentally, Min-gi had returned and witnessed all of Ji-eum's actions. In another development, Ji-eum's brother tried to meet with Seo-ha to discuss what he had learned. Finally, Seo-ha discovered that the accident from years ago was an attempt on his life. Seo-ha's eyes showed disbelief as he could not immediately accept this secret. The next morning at the workplace, Cho-won innocently called Ji-eum sister in front of everyone. Ji-eum had to pull her aside and remind her not to call her that in public, as her current identity was Ji-eum, not Ju-won from her past life. Unfortunately, these words were overheard by Secretary Do-yoon on the stairs. Not only did he hear everything, but he also repeated exactly what he had heard earlier. Secretary Do-yoon did not believe in reincarnation. However, Ji-eum could not let him leave so easily. Eventually, under pressure, all three agreed to keep this matter a complete secret. Cho-won grabbed his hand and suddenly said that she liked him, causing all three to be momentarily stunned. Cho-won realized she had misspoken, saying that she believed in him. As a result, Secretary Do-yoon left in embarrassment, while Cho-won, feeling shy, buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Meanwhile, Seo-ha held the business card of the loan shark company in his hand, contemplating what Ji-eum's brother had said. He decided to go alone to the office of the loan shark director. Unbeknownst to Seo-ha, Ji-eum saw him and drove after him. Seo-ha failed to obtain any information from the director and gave him a week to reveal who was behind the orchestrated accident before leaving. As soon as Seo-ha left, Ji-eum arrived. She entered just in time to overhear the director talking to someone. He was recounting Seo-ha's recent visit, which made Ji-eum realize that she had indeed been killed in her past life, which is why she had been reincarnated immediately. Moreover, Seo-ha was aware of this fact. Ji-eum grabbed the director by the throat and demanded to know who he had been speaking with. However, the director refused to reveal anything, even under duress, because if he revealed the information, he would also be killed. At the same time, Seo-ha received a message from Secretary Do-yoon on his way home. Secretary Do-yoon said that his father was the driver involved in the car accident years ago. Seo-ha remembered that. Before taking his last breath, the man had tried to comfort him and told him not to be afraid. Moreover, the day of Do-yoon's memorial for his father coincided with the anniversary of Ju-won's death. Seo-ha immediately instructed the driver to change the destination to Do-yoon's house. Meanwhile, Ji-eum arrived at Seo-ha's house but found no one there. She called Secretary Do-yoon to ask if he was with the director, but Do-yoon was still at the office. He had purposely stayed late to wait for Cho-won to return. However, when Cho-won invited him to dinner, he declined. Despite his feelings for her, Do-yoon had to restrain himself, not wanting to appear as though he was trying to seduce the rich girl. Being mocked multiple times for being Seo-ha's secretary had already left him feeling exhausted. When Do-yoon returned home, he found Seo-ha at his house. Seo-ha asked Do-yoon to step outside to talk and heard Do-yoon confirm that the deceased driver was his father. Seo-ha then asked him why he hadn't told him that, whether he was worthy of being his friend. Do-yoon said despondently, "I'm not your friend, I'm just a secretary." He plucked Do-yoon's hand, and the two couldn't help but rush into a fight until, feeling that he couldn't punch Do-yoon anymore, Seo-ha then sat down beside him, and they both gradually calmed down. Do-yoon explained that he simply thought his father had passed away while working. Seo-ha understood this, and only blamed himself for not knowing about it until now. Too many bad things had happened in one day. Seo-ha dejectedly walked home, and was surprised to see Ji-eum sitting in a corner in front of the door, as if she had been waiting for him for a long time. Hearing her say she missed him and came to see him, Seo-ha asked if she had been waiting long. She felt she had waited long enough to understand how difficult it is to wait for someone. Instead of answering, Seo-ha asked if she could hold him. In Ji-eum's embrace, feeling her comforting presence, Seo-ha finally found his heart at peace. Ji-eum said that they would not have an unhappy ending. At the same time, at Ae-kyung's shop, Min-gi stared blankly at the bell stick, seemingly deep in thought. At this moment, Min-gi's identity was revealed. He was an archaeology professor. Secretary Do-yoon woke up with a headache, and a strange memory of Cho-won suddenly flashed through his mind, making him feel confused. Just then, Cho-won called, but Do-yoon was so drunk that he couldn't remember what had happened, which left Cho-won feeling a bit disappointed. It turned out that only she remembered the events of the previous night. Tonight, Seo-ha had an important family dinner. Although they were family, they didn't miss any opportunity to mock each other. Seo-ha sat at the table, seemingly ignoring their remarks. Eventually, he stood up and asked to leave the table because he couldn't eat anymore. Despite his father's orders to sit down, Seo-ha insisted on leaving. Before he could even get out of the house, he suddenly received a call from director Jong-hoon. Jong-hoon said he risked his life to reveal the truth to Seo-ha and demanded that he prepare the money. He also mentioned that the mastermind was someone from the MI group and was very close to Seo-ha. This news made Seo-ha feel even colder. He paid no attention to his clothes and ended up sinking into the pool in front of him. In contrast to the atmosphere there, the family meal between Ji-eum, Cho-won, and Ae-kyung was extremely warm, and learned that Ae-kyung was also Ji-eum's granddaughter in a previous life. The three of them had an extremely enjoyable conversation, and even asked Min-gi to take a photo of them as a keepsake. Cho-won got drunk and asked Secretary Do-yoon to come pick her up, saying that since she brought him home last time, he had to pick her up this time. The two of them considered it even, while Secretary Do-yoon was speechless and helpless. He suddenly received a call from Seo-ha. At this moment, Seo-ha was completely soaked. In the distance, a car approached and suddenly stopped in front of him. Focusing closely, he realized that the person who stepped out was Ji-eum. She gently took a towel and wrapped it around him. Unable to contain himself, Seo-ha unexpectedly bent down and kissed Ji-eum. When he regained his senses, he quickly pulled away from her lips, but Ji-eum wasn't going to let him go. She pulled Seo-ha closer to her, then leaned up and kissed him deeply, leaving Seo-ha in a daze. However, the sudden progression of their relationship left Seo-ha a bit overwhelmed. Ji-eum's appearance had saved Seo-ha's world that had just collapsed. Ji-eum took him home and even cooked braised beef for him to eat. The familiar taste made Seo-ha suddenly feel cheerful again, though he no longer remembered that Ju-won had made a similar dish before. Meanwhile, as Do-yoon was helping Cho-won home, she suddenly leaned in to kiss him. Strangely, Secretary Do-yoon did not shy away. Unfortunately, before she could kiss him, she collapsed asleep on his shoulder. Just then, Cho-won woke up, wriggled out of his hold, and went home on her own. However, she accidentally twisted her ankle to the extent that she sobered up. On the other side, Ji-eum found Seo-ha's book and was about to read it when suddenly a peach blossom fell. It turned out that Seo-ha had always cherished every moment they spent together. Touched, she ran out and hugged Seo-ha from behind. And as she began to confess her feelings again, Seo-ha suddenly stopped her. She kissed the palm of his hand, but couldn't help but ask him to date her. Seo-ha smiled and replied, asking why the rush, and assured her that he liked her too. But first, he asked her to wait for him a little longer. Just as the two were about to kiss, an ill-timed phone call from Ji-eum's brother ruined the romantic atmosphere. However, Ji-eum was surprised because the call wasn't for her, it was for Seo-ha. Ji-eum went to confront her brother, and, after questioning him, learned that he was the one who revealed the truth about the accident to Seo-ha. She warned him not to bother Seo-ha anymore. Meanwhile, Aekyung's condition worsened to the point where Min-gi had to give her painkillers. Aekyung asked him to help her hide her illness from Ji-eum. Ji-eum still maintained a cautious attitude toward Min-gi, knowing that she had touched the magical bell. Min-gi no longer hid anything, and directly asked her how long she had remembered her past life. Ji-eum was shocked to discover that Min-gi could also remember his past life, just like her. Min-gi, in his current 23rd life, explained that in order for Ji-eum to understand why she could remember her previous lives, she needed to uncover the connections from her very first life. Thanks to Min-gi, she learned that the magical bell was an object that could help her recall memories from that life. Indeed, when she touched the magical bell, the memories in her mind became much clearer, but the painful and uncomfortable sensation quickly forced her to let go of the bell stick. Meanwhile, Seo-ha's father had found out that his son was reinvestigating the accident from years ago. He told Do-yoon to keep a close eye on him and stop Seo-ha from doing such trivial and pointless things. However, Secretary Do-yoon believed that the accident had taken his father's life. Seo-ha's uncle unexpectedly visited him, bringing a lot of food. At first glance, it seemed like he cared about his nephew. But when left alone and noticing Seo-ha forgot to lock his phone, the uncle picked it up and checked it. Seeing that the most recent call was with Director Jong-hoon, his face immediately changed. Seo-ha left the house with Secretary Do-yoon to go to work. Seeing Cho-won dressed very gently today, Secretary Do-yoon was a bit dazed. Cho-won wanted to ask Secretary Do-yoon to speak in private, just wanted to know how Do-yoon felt about her. She mentioned the incident when he helped her home, and simultaneously also confessed to him that although she was drunk, Cho-won still remembered everything. In the end, she asked Do-yoon if he liked her. Do-yoon honestly admitted that he did. Even though he liked her, he said he would not date her, and the reason was because of himself. Hearing this, Cho-won felt a bit sad. Do-yoon then went to the office and, noticing the suspicious behavior of the two people in front of him, took out his phone and called Ji-eum outside. He reminded her to be more cautious at work and to consider Seo-ha's position. If not, he threatened to reveal her true identity. Unexpectedly, even someone as skeptical as Do-yoon had been swayed by Ji-eum. He asked her how long she planned to keep this secret from Seo-ha. The truth was, Ji-eum herself didn't know. Back at work, Ji-eum encountered Hana and realized she was the girl standing on the sidewalk the other day. Once again, Hana called her Ju-won. Seeing the demeanor of the girl in front of her, Ji-eum recalled the close people she had met. Finally, a face appeared in her mind. Ji-eum gasped and asked if it was really her. Hana nodded and then opened her arms to embrace Ji-eum. Unexpectedly, Hana was actually Seo-ha's mother, who had passed away from illness long ago. At the same time, Seo-ha received a message from Director Jong-hoon and demanding Seo-ha come to make a deal. Seo-ha wasted no time and rushed to the loan shark's office, but Director Jong-hoon had already moved. While searching around, Seo-ha accidentally bumped into someone. It turned out Ji-eum had also rushed there out of concern for him. Seo-ha, worried she might get hurt because of him, grabbed her shoulders and scolded her, asking if she would only stop when she drove him mad. However, Ji-eum wasn't remorseful at all, and instead took Seo-ha's words as a third confession of love. On their way back, Seo-ha unexpectedly received another call from Director Jong-hoon, telling him to come to the address he had sent for the deal, but warning him not to bring anyone along. Ji-eum pleaded with Seo-ha to let her drive him there, and they agreed that Ji-eum would wait outside. Meanwhile, Director Jong-hoon and his men were on the move as well, unaware that their car was being followed. Both cars stopped in front of a deserted field, and Seo-ha stopped Ji-eum from going further in, convincing her to let him handle it alone. At this point, Seo-ha had reached his limit, saying that if he were to get lost, Ji-eum would seek him out again. Ji-eum covered her mouth and laughed, nodding as she watched his figure walk away. However, a fleeting image suddenly flashed in her mind. She had to find the connections from her first life. Driven by those memories, Ban Ji-eum's feet unconsciously followed that distant figure. Moon Seo-ha entered an abandoned building. Just as he stepped inside, a falling object landed near him. Startling Seo-ha, he moved closer to check, and as he suspected, the object that had fallen was a person, and it was none other than the man director Jong-hoon. Spotting a suspicious figure in the distance, Seo-ha gave chase. He hid behind a nearby wall before suddenly lunging out and striking one of the men. However, during the struggle, another man struck Seo-ha on the head with a bat. They took advantage of the moment to escape. Ban Ji-eum arrived just in time and stepped inside, horrified to see someone lying there. She was about to move closer to check when a hand suddenly covered her eyes. Lee Sang-ah hugged her tightly. The police arrived to seal off the scene. One of director Jong-hoon's men was still lingering nearby, holding the bag that contained the evidence from the accident that night. Seo-ha's father, Moon Jong-hoon, arranged to meet Ban Ji-eum at his private residence. He handed her an envelope in an attempt to shut her mouth. Ji-eum grew even more confused. His son was almost killed, and instead of doing everything in his power to find the culprit, Seo-ha's father was trying to cover everything up. He told Ji-eum that by doing this, he was protecting Seo-ha. Yoon Cho-won had begun to treat Kang Min-gi like a family member, and as the two were enjoying a meal together, Cho-won returned home, bringing a gift for her niece. Inside was a mustard-colored sweater that she was fond of. Suddenly, Cho-won called Min-gi outside to talk. She told him that today she had glimpsed some memories from her past life. She saw the backs of many people and recognized one of them. It was someone very important to her in this life. She then suspiciously asked Min-gi, "Did you really come here by chance? Could it be that we were lovers from 1,000 years ago?" Min-gi laughed and denied it, suggesting that she could try holding the bell again to remember something. Ban Ji-eum closed her eyes, and the memories from her first life gradually came back. She saw an image of herself standing among fluttering silk sheets, smiling as she looked at someone's shadow. Another image appeared of Seo-ha playing with children under the sunlight, and finally, an image of them meeting on a bridge amidst a sky full of fireworks. It turned out that she and Seo-ha had a connection from their very first life. This thought made her smile. Ji-eum put the bell down, even as Min-gi urged her to try holding it again. But Ji-eum refused and walked away. This didn't seem to be the outcome Min-gi had hoped for. It turned out Ji-eum had only recalled half of the memories. The figure she initially saw wasn't Seo-ha, but Min-gi, and there were still painful memories that Ji-eum hadn't remembered yet. Min-gi had, in fact, been present in her very first lifetime. That same night, Seo heard the sound of a bell, but when he opened the door, there was no one there, only a bag placed in front of him, with a note inside stating that it contained evidence to uncover the culprit, had handed the evidence over to Seo-ha. Inside, there was indeed the signature and information of the driver at the time of the accident. His name was Ban Hak-soo, and there was also a debt contract with his name, listing Ban Dong-woo as the guarantor. Upon reading this, Seo-ha immediately thought of someone. Dong-woo. Wasn't he Ji-eum's brother? He quickly pulled out Ji-eum's information from when she had applied for her job. His suspicion was correct. Ban Hak-soo was Ji-eum's father. Seo-ha was stunned, recalling Ji-eum's words from before. Sometimes the enemy from a past life can become family in this one. This truth left Seo-ha in shock. Just then, Ji-eum called. She was still immersed in the memories she had seen from her first life. She told him the story of a couple whose preordained union from 1,000 years ago had surely met for some reason, but Seo-ha's mind was in turmoil at that moment. He told her that it would be better if there was no reason. Hearing this, Seo-ha suddenly looked up at the moon, fell silent, and seemed deeply troubled. The next morning, when Seo-ha went to work, he encountered Ji-eum, and she sensed something unusual about his attitude. At that moment, Ji-eum's desk phone rang, revealing that her alcoholic father had come to the hotel, causing a scene. He scolded her for not going home to cook for her brother. Even worse, he demanded that Ji-eum rent him a room at the hotel. When his request was denied, he, out of habit, tried to raise his hand to hit her, but Ji-eum blocked him and threw him out. Hae Do-yoon witnessed the entire incident, and it seemed his view of her shifted slightly. She was no longer the daughter of the man who had intentionally caused the accident and fled. She was simply Ji-eum. Gently patting her head, he said, "You've had it tough," then specifically told her that he would cook dinner for her tonight. Meanwhile, in Yang Yeon-ok's office, Han-na suddenly entered, taking on the role of a delivery person and handing her a bouquet of flowers. The smile on Yeon-ok's face froze. It turned out that when Sang-ah was alive, her favorite flowers were gladiolas. Director Yeon-ok, terrified, threw the bouquet aside. After work, Seo-ha kept his promise and went home to cook for Ji-eum. While watching him focus on cooking, Ji-eum confessed that the person who had come to the hotel that morning was her father. Seo-ha had already resolved the conflicts in his heart. Therefore, he told Ji-eum to put family matters aside and that he had decided to focus only on the two of them. After they finished eating, Seo-ha did not let her do anything and directly told her to go upstairs and wait for him to bring up the fruit. Ji-eum found a suitable spot to place the gift for Ju-won and accidentally discovered the bag containing her father's criminal evidence. She finally understood Seo-ha's strange attitude and the things he said today. Ji-eum ran downstairs to hug him, and shortly after, she left and quickly returned to the old house. Seeing Ji-eum's serious attitude, her brother could only sigh and go outside. She unplugged the TV her father was watching, not allowing him to make excuses. Ji-eum asked him if he had ever killed anyone, and he considered it just an accident, claiming he was only doing extra work to support his family. Ji-eum felt that he was not human, treating even murder as a side job. She then declared that this would be the last time they would meet in this lifetime, and left without listening to his final words. It turned out that at that time, his car's brakes suddenly failed, turning a minor collision into a major accident. He left in a panic without reporting to the police. Seo-ha had burned all the evidence about Ban Hak-soo and her resume. Just then, a tape fell out of the bag, which recorded a short period of time before the accident. Ji-eum then met with Han-na to find out who might have ordered the murder. Han-na believed the person with the highest motive was Jang Yeon-ok, but confirmation was still needed. Ji-eum met with director Yeon-ok, and upon hearing her suspicions, Yeon-ok burst into laughter. Could it be that the chairman's son was nearly killed, yet he wanted me to remain silent to cover up for her? Ji-eum also felt that this was unlikely. Seo-ha had opened the tape, revealing that director Jong-hoon had been recording transactions with a machine when the mastermind suddenly walked in. Since the recorder had not yet been turned off, it captured the entire conversation. The voice on the recording was so familiar that Seo-ha played it back multiple times, unable to believe his ears. Meanwhile, Ji-eum was stunned by the truth she had just uncovered. The person Seo-ha must not discover was none other than his own uncle, Lee Sang-hyuk. In front of Seo-ha's uncle, Ji-eum could only calmly bow her head and then leave. After replaying the recording several times, Seo-ha finally accepted that the person who wanted to kill him was indeed his uncle. He kept asking why his uncle had done this, and then, as if going mad, he began to smash the objects around him. Cha Chung-hwa lost her sister. Moreover, he also had to raise his younger brother, including a sister he loved who died while protecting him. Not only did innocent people die, meanwhile, Ji-eum rushed back to Seo-ha's home and found that the evidence had been completely burned, leaving only ashes behind. Ji-eum could not help but feel heartbroken. Entering the room and seeing Seo-ha in a disheveled appearance huddled in a corner, unable to bear seeing him torment himself, Ji-eum decided to ease his guilt by revealing the truth. In the room with just the two of them, Ji-eum slowly played a piece of music, a melody known only to herself and Seo-ha. As the familiar music played, Seo-ha stared in shock and asked her how she knew it. Ji-eum responded slowly, saying that she was the author of it. He should try to play it. It would improve his mood significantly. Ji-eum repeated the words she had once said to Ju-won in the past, which made Seo-ha confused. He asked how she knew about that, and she explained that she used to be Ju-won. Despite Ji-eum's explanations, he thought Ji-eum was just trying to comfort him and asked her to leave so he could be alone. Ji-eum then mentioned the treasure box she had given him on his birthday and said that the key was in the book he had loved the most. She also gave him a note, instructing him to open the note only after he had opened the treasure box. Ji-eum conveyed this to Cho-won. Ji-eum said it was because she had something she wanted to say to Seo-ha as Ju-won. She recounted the anguish of having to remember all her past lifetimes, which made Cho-won feel heartbroken for her. Ji-eum resolutely walked on, and the 19 long lifetimes seemed to appear vividly before her eyes. When Ji-eum returned home, she was startled to find a magical bell in her room. Curious, she was about to touch it, but ultimately decided against it. She returned the bell to Min-gi and told him that, for her now, the first life meant nothing and was of no importance. Afterward, Ji-eum left, leaving Min-gi alone, lost in thought. Even in his dreams, Seo-ha continued to think about Ju-won's last words, but he still couldn't understand what she meant. The next morning, he took the treasure box back to his house and found the book Ju-won had once loved. Just as Ji-eum had said, a key fell out unexpectedly. Before Seo-ha could open the box, his uncle appeared and he quickly hid the box. Since discovering the truth, Seo-ha could no longer treat his uncle the same way. Clearly, he didn't get the response he hoped for. Meanwhile, Hee Do-yoon went to the bar to bring his drunken younger brother, Hee Do-jin, home. Due to his intoxication, Do-jin was causing a scene and refused to go home. He also held his brother's collar, demanding to go eat ice cream. Cha Chung-hwa happened to pass by and saw it, thinking that Do-yoon was being beaten by a drunk man, so she immediately ran to beat Do-jin, which made him sober. Noticing that Chung-hwa was increasingly concerned about him, Do-yoon thought carefully and decided to firmly reject Chung-hwa's feelings. He couldn't be with her. He was merely enduring it because it was his choice, and he wasn't in the position to think about this feeling. Therefore, he advised Chung-hwa to stop here. Clearly, these words hurt Chung-hwa, and she turned away and walked off. Do-yoon's younger brother, who witnessed this, could only remain silent. Meanwhile, Ji-eum went alone to the park, where they had once missed their appointment. She stood in front of the carousel and waited until all the lights were out, when there was no one around. Then she went back home. At that moment, Seo-ha was still submerged in the pool, lost in thought. About Moon Seo-ha, he returned to the villa, took the treasure box, and opened it. Inside, there was a small notebook made by Yoon Ju-won herself, in which she recounted the story of a witch who could clearly remember her previous lives. After being reincarnated, she sought out her family, but no one understood her. That was when she realized that no matter where she went, she wasn't welcomed. She could only remember everything, but could not share it with anyone. Her heart was like a growing collection of heavy stones. Upon reading this, Seo-ha finally understood the words his sister had tried to convey in her last breaths. In her next life, Ju-won would surely return to meet him. At that moment, Seo-ha suddenly remembered the note Ban Ji-eum had given him. He hurriedly opened it and read that if Seo-ha believed in what was written in the notebook, he should just go to the place they had missed out on the day she gave him the treasure box. She would be there waiting for him. Seo-ha rushed out, calling Ji-eum along the way, but she didn't pick up. Ji-eum invited him to come and confirm it himself. To her, Seo-ha was just an ordinary child, but when she was with this little boy, it was as if the heavy stones weighing down her heart were lifted, allowing her to momentarily forget her past lives and feel as happy as a 12-year-old child. Did someone who remembered 18 of her own lives really smile with this child? At the park, Seo-ha searched for her everywhere and finally found her at the carousel. Only now did he dare to believe that the sister he loved was standing before him. The two of them embraced tightly, and she said that both Ju-won and Ji-eum wanted Seo-ha to be happy. At that moment, Kang Min-gi and Han-na were deep in thought, surprised at how deep Ji-eum and Seo-ha's bond was. At this rate, Seo-ha would also run into trouble. The two decided to tell them the truth before it was too late. The next morning, Ae-kyung gave Ji-eum a gift as a thank you for the shirt Ji-eum had given her the day before. Just then, she received a call from Han-na. Afterward, Ji-eum went to find Jang Yeon-ok and sat down next to her, remembering how Ji-eum had falsely accused her of the accident before. Yeon-ok was about to give her a glass of water as an alms and send her away, but Ji-eum didn't give her the chance. She commented that Yeon-ok had aged quite a lot. Yeon-ok's expression at that moment was as if she was looking at a madwoman, but Ji-eum continued speaking in a tone as elegant as a refined lady. She mentioned that back when Yeon-ok was tutoring her. Hearing this, Mrs. Jang lost her composure, but Ji-eum forced her to listen until the end. If she went through all the trouble of stealing from someone, she had to do it well. Then Ji-eum said that she shouldn't have used her son to stage a threat. She was a mother too, after all. Ji-eum conveyed a message from Sang-ah to Yeon-ok. She should sincerely apologize to Seo-ha. Otherwise, Sang-ah would cling to her forever. Yeon-ok turned pale and sat there motionless, while Han-na, who had been silently watching the scene the whole time, walked after Ji-eum and gave her a high five. She finally felt somewhat satisfied. Before leaving, Han-na sent her wishes to Ji-eum, saying she would walk through it smoothly on her own. Just then, a message from Min-gi came in, asking her if this was the fireworks lake she had seen before. After searching online, Ji-eum discovered that such a place really did exist. Meanwhile, Seo-ha had returned to his old house and coincidentally met his uncle there. This time, Seo-ha finally voiced the question that had been troubling him for so long. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't understand why his uncle had tried to kill him. His uncle sincerely admitted his mistake, saying that he had never intended to kill Seo-ha. He had thought the person sitting in the car that day was the chairman, so he orchestrated a small accident as a warning. But he never imagined that Seo-ha would be the one sitting in the car that day. Stunned by this truth, Seo-ha persuaded his uncle to turn himself in before he took any action himself. In the end, his uncle chose to pay the price for his actions. The truth about the accident years ago was finally revealed when the news reported that Sang Hyuk, the director of the MI group, had surrendered to the police. This news once again stirred the pain of those who had lost loved ones in the accident. To comfort Seo-ha and also to seek some information about her first life, Ji-eum suggested they take a 2-day, 1-night trip to the lake with fireworks that Min-gi had sent her. The two of them arrived at the bridge from Ji-eum's memories. A man had walked up to her amid the bright red fireworks. Hearing this, Seo-ha felt a pang of jealousy toward that man. As Seo-ha walked up to her, the memory of the fireworks display from 1,000 years ago suddenly flooded back into her mind. Indeed, at that time, she had rushed to his side, but she held a sharp knife in her hand, her eyes filled with hatred. It turned out that this was not a romantic memory of a young couple, but the beginning of a painful story. At the same time, Min-gi stood in front of her room, continuously waving the magical bell in his hand, while Yoon Cho-won, as she was walking, was startled by a glass flower pot that suddenly fell beside her. It seemed that the troubles Min-gi had mentioned were indeed coming true. On the other side, the memories that were being awakened made Ji-eum uncomfortable, so Seo-ha led her back to the room to rest. She questioned why there were 2 bedrooms, and then stubbornly insisted on sleeping in the same room as Seo-ha. He moved as if to kiss her, then leaned close to her ear and told her to go take a shower. Their feelings for each other gradually warmed up. Meanwhile, the internet was gradually buzzing with talk about the accident years ago. People weren't just curious about other people's business. They were also very interested in Seo-ha's handsome face. Seo-ha burst out laughing, then apologized to her. It wasn't because of this, but because he couldn't do anything about Ju-won's wrongful suffering. Ji-eum comforted him, saying she knew he had burned all of his father's evidence because he was afraid she would be hurt. That night, Ji-eum once again dreamed of her past life memories. She woke up with a start, wondering if Han-na could be Seo-ha, as they had the same face. She went to Seo-ha's room, but he noticed her. Seo-ha asked if she really wanted to sleep with him that bad, then pulled her down, telling Ji-eum that if she wanted to sleep with him, then let's sleep together. But Seo-ha's idea of sleeping together turned out to be like this. The next morning was just another typical day for Ha Do-yoon, though the breakfast he made wasn't quite normal. Meanwhile, Ji-eum and Seo-ha enjoyed the rest of their happy time together before returning home. But on the way, she unexpectedly received a call from Min-gi, informing her that A-kyung had been hospitalized. Hearing this, Ji-eum rushed to the hospital. A-kyung was still unconscious, and Min-gi admitted that he had helped A-kyung hide her illness. This made Ji-eum scold him relentlessly. Just then, Min-gi noticed Seo-ha entering, his expression momentarily complicated. Meanwhile, Cho-won finally attended a reunion party with her friends after a long time. Of course, the scumbag Gup was also present. Unexpectedly, Ha Do-yoon showed up as well. Cho-won and he exchanged awkward glances. Gup, being crude, continued to make remarks to embarrass Do-yoon, but Do-yoon acted as if he didn't care. He approached Go Soo-jin, bowed, and explained why Seo-ha couldn't attend, then accepted an invitation card from her before he left. Go Soo-jin rudely invited him to sit and eat, went further by insulting him as a money chaser, who only latched on to Seo-ha and Cho-won. He even said that Cho-won had been too naive at that moment. She angrily called Seo-ha an incompetent rich guy, and then stormed out despite everyone trying to stop her. Meanwhile, Hannah went to meet Min-gi, explaining that she was late because she had to prepare a gift. Min-gi didn't mind and simply informed her that I-kyung had been hospitalized. He had anticipated this, thinking it might make it easier to convince Ji-eum. He then motivated her not to look back, as from now on, she wouldn't need to remember her past life. On the other side, when Seo-ha returned home, he noticed a gift box placed right in front of his door. Before he could open it, Ji-eum called, apologizing for not saying goodbye earlier. Seo-ha comforted her in the same way Ju-won had, which helped Ji-eum feel a bit better. The next morning, Ji-eum brought the box to the office. Secretary Do-yoon handed her the invitation card he had picked up the day before. Ji-eum told him not to go next time. However, Do-yoon explained that the hotel needed the family's corporation, and he had gone there for work. Hearing this, Ji-eum said she would go meet Yeon-ok. She had uncovered financial report discrepancies related to Yeon-ok, but Yeon-ok still stubbornly argued that the hotel belonged to her. Seizing the moment, Seo-ha produced photos showing how she had neglected the hotel and presented Ji-eum's notebook as the final piece of evidence to take down director Yeon Ok. His mother had known about this for a long time and had documented everything. Not wanting to argue with her any further, Seo-ha said he would let the law handle it, then walked away. Secretary Do-yoon expressed concern that Yeon Ok might try to convince the board of directors at any cost. Suddenly, the chairman appeared. This was the first time that the father and son smiled at each other. Hana, watching from a distance, also smiled. The chairman immediately entered the room, announcing that the board of directors had unanimously removed Yeon Ok from her position as CEO. Yeon Ok knelt and begged the chairman, but her fate could no longer be changed. In the hotel lobby, she angrily threw the branch of flowers that Seo-ha liked most onto the ground. Afterward, Seo-ha entered a shop and bought a bouquet of flowers. Hana walked briskly right behind him, and from afar she suddenly ran up and hugged him from behind, then gently told him to live well. Seo-ha looked at the unfamiliar girl in surprise as she suddenly presented him with a knitted turtle and quickly walked away. Seo-ha was reminded of what his mother had once said. Was it that in his past life, Seo-ha was a turtle? Perhaps this was Hana's final goodbye. Meanwhile, Ae-kyung was at the hospital, taking care of her nephew. Because of this, the restaurant was either closed or might even shut down permanently. When Ji-eum told Min-gi about this, he only inquired about Ae-kyung's condition. Upon learning that Ae-kyung had been diagnosed with a tumor and was preparing for surgery, Min-gi asked whether the surgery would be successful. Min-gi's indifferent attitude made Ji-eum angrily bang the chair. At this point, Min-gi candidly admitted that he had faced many consequences when reuniting with past life connections. If Ji-eum were an ordinary person, she wouldn't have sought out Ae-kyung when she was young. Ae-kyung's illness was a result of Ji-eum's search. Finally, Min-gi said something that made Ji-eum realize whether this lifetime was truly a new life for her. The past life relationships she had sought out would ultimately end as Ae-kyung's had. Min-gi wanted to help Ji-eum, and the answer lay in her first life. Ji-eum once again took up the magic staff, and the earliest memories resurfaced. A girl called her Su-ae with great affection. That girl was Cho-won. At that moment, Seo-ha had also arrived at her house. He entered the room holding a bouquet of flowers. Ji-eum's mind was filled with fragmented memories. The images of herself and Cho-won fleeing across a field, shadows of people chasing them amid the sound of ringing bells. Seo-ha's footsteps intertwined with those from the past. The final image was of a sword swinging and Cho-won's bloodied figure. At that moment, Seo-ha shook her away. In Ji-eum's eyes, the images of him and Hana from her memories merged into one. Ji-eum was stunned and began to cry desperately, glaring at him with hatred. She repeatedly muttered that she would kill him, then lost her sanity and began to strangle Seo-ha. The image of the blade in her hand plunging into Hana's body reappeared in her mind. The first life of Ji-eum appeared vividly. At that time, Ji-eum was a weaver, and her dyed fabrics were extremely valuable because the materials were sourced from a sacred mountain. Min-gi, at that time, was a nobleman from the temple, while Cho-won was Ji-eum's elder sister, named Seo. In this lifetime, Seo's body was very frail and afflicted with illness. Amid what seemed like despair, news from a physician gave Ji-eum hope once more. However, the precious herbs she needed could not be bought with money. They could only be exchanged for magical bells from the temple. Although stealing from the temple was a grave wrongdoing, Ji-eum's eyes still showed defiance, even though this was extremely dangerous. On the day Ji-eum went to the temple to offer the dyed cloth, she had silently noted the location of the magical bell. Min-gi ordered that no one be allowed to enter or leave. Ji-eum hid nearby until the king had departed. Then she slowly entered the temple without any fear. She stole the magical bell, despite the fact that this might anger the gods. She fled with her sister and continued to escape until morning. But soon, Min-gi discovered them and sent soldiers in pursuit. The two were surrounded and could not escape. At this point, Seo realized that her sister had committed a grave offense. Ji-eum begged Min-gi to show mercy and let them go. As Seo's condition was critical, Ji-eum offered to dedicate the rest of her life to serving the heavens. However, Min-gi considered that life was too short. Even though Ji-eum had earnestly asked, but that wouldn't change Min-gi's mind. Seo asked, "What kind of god do you worship after all?" Ji-eum shouted hatefully at that moment. Seo-ha's voice pulled her back to reality. Ji-eum tried to close her eyes to hold on to the memory, only to see a flashing blade. Seo was lying on the ground, covered in blood. Ji-eum was helpless and could only hatefully hug Seo, watching her enemy lie with the sword still in hand. Ji-eum's stern voice urged her to seek revenge as she escaped the old memories and faced her thousand-year enemy. Ji-eum used all her strength to strangle Seo-ha. Her eyes looked at him as if the hatred of 1,000 years had never disappeared. Starting from the place where the red fireworks were glowing, from this point, their fated enmity was formed. Ji-eum tightened her grip on Seo-ha's neck. Cho-won spoke each word in interrupted gasps, struggling to utter her name. She finally came to her senses and released him, then began to cry in distress. Ji-eum had seen her first life. Her sister had died. Her eyes were red as she looked at him with the anger that he had killed her sister. Overcome with grief, Ji-eum cried out in a frenzy, asking Seo-ha what she should do. Seo-ha was heartbroken and embraced her. Seeing this, Min-gi decided to leave. Ji-eum pleaded with Seo-ha to leave her alone. Unable to do anything else, Seo-ha had no choice but to leave. Unexpectedly, Min-gi asked to meet him outside for a conversation. Seo-ha left, hoping he could help Ji-eum. Even though he couldn't remember his past life, he felt he needed to try even harder. Min-gi said there was a way to help Ji-eum. As Seo-ha left, Min-gi asked him to please help Ji-eum return to normal, as only he could move her. Meanwhile, Secretary Do-yoon's younger brother unexpectedly visited Cho-won. Noticing his brother's demeanor over the past few days, he finally decided to reveal the truth. After Cho-won had left that day, he had cried, watching her figure fade away and standing motionless. Then he realized that it seemed that he really liked the girl in front of him. However, Cho-won, upon hearing these words, felt no joy. She felt even more sorrowful, knowing that Do-yoon had suffered in silence. Yet she had only thought she was the one who was more miserable. This made it even harder for her to approach him. Meanwhile, Seo-ha sat alone and examined the gift that Ji-eum had given him. It turned out that behind her smile was a lot of suffering that he was unaware of. Seo-ha recalled what she had said today. He had killed her sister. If that were truly the case, then what? The next morning, his uncle was handed over to the prosecutor's office. Min-gi visited A-kyung and encountered Ji-eum. Still with the same cautious attitude, she asked him if he knew she was present in her previous life, and why he hadn't mentioned it from the beginning. Min-gi replied that Ji-eum had to find out for herself to uncover the person who made her remember her past life. It was very rare to meet past connections in the same appearance. She had waited 1,000 years for this, and now it was time to restore everything to normal. After saying that, Min-gi handed the magical bell back to Ji-eum, advising her to come find him only after she fully remembered her previous life. The next morning, Ji-eum arranged to meet Cho-won. The two of them went to an exhibition. Remembering her first life made Ji-eum feel that the relationship between them was becoming increasingly close. She told Cho-won that perhaps deep and intense relationships, whether filled with love or hatred, are all arranged for the day of reunion. This made Cho-won think about her and Do-yoon. If there is no fate, no matter how hard one tries, then it cannot succeed. She decided to let go of this love. Meanwhile, Do-yoon suddenly received a call from Ji-eum, and Seo-ha happened to be nearby. Ji-eum simply said that if Cho-won really gave up on him for the last time, he would be the one unable to let go of her. She hoped these words would become a stone stuck in Secretary Do-yoon's heart. Before hanging up, she also specifically instructed him to take care of Seo-ha. She couldn't call him because she feared she would rush over out of longing for him. Seo-ha, after hearing this, then smiled to himself. Secretary Do-yoon decisively ended the call. Seeing that Do-yoon wouldn't lend him his phone, Seo-ha decided to find Ji-eum himself. When Ji-eum saw Seo-ha searching for her, she ran away to avoid him. Seo-ha patiently asked if he could come to her, and upon receiving her consent, he immediately ran to embrace her. He apologized for having hurt her deeply in their previous life, and wondered what he could do to soothe Ji-eum's pain, but in the end, he could only apologize. The events from 1,000 years ago were nearly a past life she had completely forgotten, but because her actions had put his in danger, she couldn't face him and fled. Ji-eum decided to return to being a normal person, believing that if she stopped remembering her previous life, things would become easier. Ji-eum once again picked up the magic bell, but this time with Seo-ha by her side. The previously missing part of her memory came back. It turned out that the person she had intended to stab was Min-gi, but Hana had shielded him and took the blow for him. At that time, the chances of survival were slim. He advised her not to use blood to pay blood. and to take care of herself in the future. The memory then returned to the day when she and Seo were in a state of siege. In the midst of her desperate plea for Mingi's help, a hand had intervened. Hannah advised her not to resist, warning that if she did, she would be the one to die. Unexpectedly at that moment, Mingi ruthlessly drew his blade and struck Seo. In the astonished gaze of Ji-eum, he even intended to use the knife to finish her off, but was stopped by Hannah, who took the sword from his hand. He could only be powerless against her pain, while Ji-eum was helpless in the face of Mingi's disregard for human life. That was why she was willing to risk everything to assassinate the king, only to be ultimately shot down by Mingi's soldiers on Hannah's shoulder. At that time, Hannah received a blow from Ji-eum, but still angrily shouted for him to stop. However, it was too late. The events on the firework bridge from that year ended in Ji-eum's grudge. She held the magical bell in her hand, carrying the last obsession of life to say to Mingi, she will never forget this day, this hatred that she will remember it for life, afterlife. Even if 100,000 years pass, she will still remember it. And when reincarnated, she will definitely take revenge. In Mingi's eyes, fear finally appeared. He struggled to pull the bell from Ji-eum's lifeless hand, but the bell's cord was tightly held by her. He could only cut it with a knife. The memories of the painful past life ended, returning everything to the pristine state of Ji-eum's dreams. On the hanging bridge, there was indeed a pair of lovers, but their fate was consumed by cruel hatred before it could fully take shape. She cherished him even more because in both her past and present lives, he had protected her. Meanwhile, Cho-won decided to let go of her feelings. She spent a long time composing a message, but in the end, couldn't send it. Just then, Do-yoon appeared and handed her an umbrella. Cho-won suddenly remembered the first time they met, when she gave him a bouquet of flowers, saying it was the last gift. Finally, she gathered the courage to let go of this relationship. The words Ji-eum had said at that time successfully became a heavy burden in the heart of Secretary Do-yoon. He suddenly grabbed Cho-won's hand before he could regret it, then confessed that he came there to see her, that he had been waiting for her. Meanwhile, Ji-eum went to see Mingi, who always seemed to be in a state of waiting for her to come for revenge. After living through 23 lifetimes, Mingi was no longer the same. He was filled with regret and sorrow because of his foolishness that had caused the deaths of many people. Mingi begged Ji-eum for forgiveness, but she said that Mingi could never earn her forgiveness. If it had been Ji-eum from 1,000 years ago, perhaps things would have been different. But now, she was no longer Ji-eum from 1,000 years ago. This present life was what mattered. Mingi revealed one final thing. If she stopped remembering her past lives, all the memories tied to the relationships from those previous lives would disappear. This left Ji-eum momentarily speechless. She happened to meet Hannah again, who had become a normal person and no longer remembered who Ji-eum was. Ji-eum felt fear at the thought of her world losing these people. Ji-eum lowered her head in helplessness, and just then, a hand suddenly grasped hers. Seo-ha pulled Ji-eum away, just like he always did whenever he felt confused or afraid. The two of them stopped at a basketball court and played joyfully. In the end, they sat down together to talk. He expressed that he didn't like the idea of her holding on to memories of him and continuing her life after he was gone. Seo-ha asked, no matter what happened, was he confident that he could make her fall in love with him all over again? Finally, Ji-eum let go of the worries in her heart. That evening, Cho-won arranged to meet her sister. She took out a matching necklace and earrings that she had wanted to give Ji-eum for a long time. Before returning to normal, Ji-eum kept her promise to visit her mother one last time. In Ju-won's old room, Ji-eum asked to give her mother a hug. The emotional mother closed her eyes, feeling as if Ju-won was right beside her. Ji-eum returned to the bridge from long ago, and in her mind, she encountered her former self from 1,000 years before. She uttered the 4 words, "I am happy now," and then smiled as flashes of memories from 19 lifetimes raced through her mind until the world faded into a gloomy afternoon. The next morning, due to personnel changes at her company, Ji-eum appeared at the hotel pool. When Seo-ha saw her, he approached and, mimicking her previous words, asked, "Is there something down there?" Ji-eum snapped out of her thoughts and suddenly remembered that he was the man from the restaurant. In truth, he had planned to take things slowly, but after meeting Ji-eum, he didn't want to let her go. He then pointed to the ring on Ji-eum's hand and innocently remarked that it was already a couple's ring. Seo-ha then asked if she was dating anyone. Ji-eum quickly waved her hands and denied it. he proudly showed off his ring, saying that his ring really was a couple's ring. Ji-eum asked Seo-ha whether he had a girlfriend. Seo-ha replied that it seemed like he had. From that moment on, Seo-ha decided to proceed with a fast-paced plan. From today on, he will confess to her 3 times. If she refuses all 3 times, he will give up. Then, seemingly unable to wait any longer, he asks her to date him. Ji-eum laughs and asks Seo-ha, "Is this the first confession?" Seo-ha nodded and said to Ji-eum, "If it was in this life, this would be the first confession. The world still revolves. Those who are destined will eventually find each other. Even if Ji-eum loses her memories, he will still come to her and bring her back."